The Slenderman, a popular urban legend that has been circulating the internet for several years now. Created by a user who goes by the name of Victor Surge as part of a scary Photoshop contest in 2009, Slenderman quickly became a widely feared legend with his featureless face and tall appearance. He became so popular that he's inspired video games, fan art, fan-made films, and lots more. More recently, however, an actual full-length feature film was created that has gained some, undesirable reception, to say the least. And that's what we'll be talking about today as we...
He's behind you.
Ah! Ugh! Dang it, Forge, stop doing that! Yeah, sorry guys, Forge dared me to play Slender the 8 Pages while discussing this video. That may seem difficult, but I do have a thing for multitasking. Anyways, with the height of Slenderman's popularity taking place in 2012, it only makes sense that Hollywood would come up with an idea to start production on a full-length feature film about the tall supernatural entity. In 2018.
Wow, that's not even jumping on the bandwagon late. That's like jumping onto where the bandwagon was supposed to be 5 years after it left.
The 2018 movie is being panned by critics and hated even more by longtime fans. Currently it sits at 8% on Rotten Tomatoes. 8%. Sheesh. With such a cool and spooky legend, how could Hollywood have possibly messed this up? Well, to be honest, there's really no easy answer. There were just way too many complications with the making of this movie from the very beginning. One of which being the fact that this was being made by the same studio that brought us the Emoji Movie.
Yep, that certainly doesn't help.
I guess they thought handling something with no face would redeem their inability to make a film with nothing but faces?
Butt faces.
But in addition to that, the timing of this movie coming out honestly couldn't have been worse.
Like I said, late bandwagon.
Well, now here's the thing, it honestly wasn't that bad of an idea to make the movie later.
Huh?
In today's pop culture, anything has the possibility of not turning out well if it's only fueled by fan hype. And I don't know if it was dang it! I don't know if it was intentional, but having the studio make this movie a few years after the Slender craze was sort of a good idea. Though it's pretty obvious that in the long run it didn't help anything.
Yeah, how can you get worse than 8%, Matt?
6%?
Your optimism is misplaced, entertainer.
Anyways, when I said bad timing, I'm actually referring to a rather gruesome incident that happened back in 2014. One that is somewhat related to the Slenderman mythos, and I put great emphasis on somewhat. However, we'll get into that later. For now, let's talk about the movie. Now, since literally any YouTube channel will focus on the negatives of movies, I want to start this video off by talking about some actually kind of well done things in the Slenderman movie. Because my belief is that movies are like cruise ships. Even if the captain steers it in the wrong direction, you still have everyone else on board doing their best to keep people happy. First off, the music. Oh golly, the music in this movie is so eerie and so well done. I was able to find it all on YouTube, and I can totally hear these tracks being in a Slenderman movie. The soundtrack was composed by Raman Djawadi, oh gosh, I can't say that name, I am so sorry, and Brandon Campbell. Not a lot of horror-related stuff comes from their list of scores composed for movies, especially for Djawadi since most of his stuff is action-based, but by golly, just listen. Oh, dang, I thought I saw a white head. This is exactly what I would expect from a Slenderman soundtrack. Eerie and unsettling, but also subtle and quiet. Half the time it almost sounds like the presence of Slenderman himself is distorting the soundtrack, particularly with the violinist. Don't know about you guys, but I'm definitely picking up this soundtrack. I mean, I'm not even a huge horror movie fan, but if there's one thing I love, it's a good soundtrack. Now, another positive in this movie is the suit, the Slenderman costume. I know it's hard to find a legit picture of him from the movie, but for you fine folks, I actually was able to find a few. Ta-da! Now most of you probably think this looks like ridiculous pajamas, but I'm actually quite a big fan of how this looks. First off, the one in the costume is none other than Javier Botet. Oh boy, these names, I am so sorry guys. Who is actually quite well known for suiting up as scary creatures in scary movies due to his odd but fascinating condition that makes him appear very skinny. He was a pretty darn good choice for the role of Slenderman. Anyways, back to the costume. While we all know that Slenderman's biggest trademark is wearing a very nice fancy suit, does it really make sense that a supernatural entity would care too much about looking fashionable? I really like the approach the movie takes in making him more rugged and actually supernatural. Almost looks like he's made of tree bark or something, which is actually a nice touch given his usual surroundings. And the area in his neck that gives the illusion of a tie is just absolutely brilliant. It's almost like when people think they see him, they describe him as wearing a suit when really it's just his actual form. I like to think the human mind itself can't actually comprehend the appearance of such an entity as Slenderman, so the brain just goes, suit? One more thing in the movie that most hardcore Slenderman fans hated was the ending.
You mean aside from Sony using their leftover Venom CGI for Slenderman's tentacles?
Yeah. Long story short, it's revealed that Slenderman apparently turns his victims into trees? Yeah, not transport them to an alternate dimension. Trees. Now, that may sound like a complete butchering of the original legend, but is it crazy that I actually kinda like the idea?
Why, 'cause you're an environmentalist?
No, that's not it. It's because when you think about it, that's very unsettling seeing how he's always surrounded by trees or always in a forest. It's almost like the trees are like his victory markings or something. So basically every time we see him, he's always walking among his past victims, who for all we know maybe were transported to another dimension. Maybe the tree is just like the doorway or something. In summary, the music, ending, and the costume are probably the only good things I can find in this movie. You've probably already heard the negatives about it, such as the bland main characters, the cheap scares, not so great CGI, and unresolved plot elements. It's really a big shame because a Slenderman movie can actually work. There's a lot of potential for a good story revolving around him. Granted, collecting pages isn't a terribly exciting story, but the sequel known as Slender the Arrival had something interesting going for it. Okay, now I think it might be time we address the elephant in the room. So can somebody please get him out of here? Security!
You idiots don't pay me enough for this job.
Well, how about you play this game, Cyan? Ah! Anyways, now that that's done, let's talk about the pressing issue. Remember when I mentioned a certain incident that happened a few years back? Well, for those of you who haven't guessed already, I'm referring to the so-called Slenderman incident that happened in May 31st in 2014, over in Waukesha, Wisconsin? I prefer not to go into great detail regarding the incident, so you can follow the link in the description for more info. But long story short, a 12-year-old girl was led into a forest by two supposed friends and then brutally assaulted by them, who were claiming to do so in the name of Slenderman. Thankfully, that girl is still alive and recovering quite well, but this obviously angered a lot of people and kinda gave the Slenderman legend a bad impression.
Wait, what? How? Because they mentioned Slenderman once? How does that make any sense?
One word. Ratings. We most likely have the media to thank for building this up as the so-called Slenderman incident. I mean, it's a no-brainer that the legend is fake, so is it really just because the assaulters mentioned his name once or twice? Would it be any different if they said they did this in a name of, like, Voldemort or Ninja Turtles? Holy cow. What? Only thing that stood out was mentioning Slenderman?
So what, did the Voldemort incident not sound catchy enough? Was that just not gonna get good enough ratings on TV?
Look, I'm well aware that this was a real and very heartbreaking event that happened back in 2014, and any sort of assault involving a deadly weapon, especially with kids, is no laughing matter in the slightest.
Yeah, but that doesn't excuse the fact that people are shifting the blame on a fictional internet character instead of, I don't know, maybe the attackers or the parents?
Really, I think it all just boils down to a couple of kids confusing an internet legend to be real and acting out of fear and confusion. Oh, and obviously very major mental problems.
You mean a group of erratic fans are causing harm to innocent people simply because they can't distinguish fiction from reality? I have never heard of that before!
Anyways, back on track. This was one of the biggest factors into why the Slenderman movie didn't do too well. For fear of getting backlash due to that incident, the studio was forced to cut many scenes out of the movie thinking they would be in poor taste. And don't get me wrong, they certainly would be. Most notably that scene where that wounded girl is walking out of the forest. Yeah, here's a representation of the director after letting that trailer scene slide.
Okay, yeah, maybe things like that were in poor taste. I mean, you definitely in no way want to glorify the real-life incident, but when you think about it, isn't it in even worse taste that everyone, including the media, is glorifying the tragic incident by constantly slapping Slenderman on it? And what, just because the assaulters mentioned it once? If you're gonna go by that logic, then you also should never read a Harry Potter book ever again. Especially if it's got Voldemort in it. Oh, and make sure they don't air another Ninja Turtle episode because, you know, it might be in poor taste.
Alright, that's enough, Forge. All in all, the problem with this movie can basically be summed up as bad timing. Oh, and Sony Pictures. It really is a shame this movie bombed the way it did. Like I said, Slenderman has amazing potential for an awesome and thrilling movie. Hopefully in a few years, maybe a different studio can take the reins and try to make a better rendition. And maybe put way less shock factor in and actually have interesting characters. Oh, and on that subject, Sony could have avoided so much trouble if they didn't depend so much on shock factor. The reason Slenderman became so unique was because of something that I call subtle creepiness. In other words, he didn't become popular through blood and gore and shocking scary face jump scares and just straight up unpleasant imagery. He became scary through the simplicity of just being a faceless being standing in one spot, only moving when you look away. He doesn't need in-your-face scary nonsense and shock factor to be terrifying. He's scary just by being himself, a mysterious supernatural creature who pursues those who get too curious. Oh, and you don't summon him through an internet video either. That's one thing I forgot to mention. Stupid. But by golly, keep the composer, because that music is bone-chilling. And I honestly think the idea with the costume still works. Either way, Slenderman is definitely a frightening internet legend that people will remember for a long time. But here's hoping it's not for the wrong reasons.
You know, Matt, you're doing quite well for doing the review and playing the game at the same time.
Well, maybe that's because I haven't gotten the first page?
What? Are you kidding? But Slenderman doesn't start catching you until you get a page. Hurry up and get one already.
Alright, jeez. And more evidence I stink at video games.